Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Izzyverse. Today's show is a very special show to me, to anyone that's into comics, and we are going to be talking a little bit about the life of two extraordinary men in the industry, two people that we lost the last couple of weeks. We lost someone this Saturday, and we lost another person a few weeks ago. I'm referring to two icons in the industry, Neal Adams and George Perez. And this episode is, well, I'm not going to do any plugs. If anything, you're going to see them down here on the screen. I'm not going to do plugs today to out of respect for both of them. I'm going to introduce you to right now two people. I may have a third person coming in to talk a little bit about what Neal Adams and George Perez meant to them. So let me go ahead and let them come in. I'm going to first introduce James. So James, what's going on, man?
Hello.
All right, and also Daryl Alexander. Hey, Daryl, how's it going?
Hey, all right. Glad to be
Good.
here.
Thank you for coming. I know it was short notice. These are the things that you don't really prepare, until they kind of happen, right?
Yeah.
So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna talk a little bit first about Neal Adams, and before we talk about Neal Adams, I just want to let everyone know. And if, again, you are more than welcome to leave a comment, and I might be able to air it depending on the comment, of course. But leave a comment telling us what was your favorite Neil or George moment. It could be, any favorite books that you had, anything that you read, a moment that you met him at one time or another. And I'll put it up in the screen for you guys for everyone to see. Um, so, with that said, we're gonna start off this half talking about the first person we lost, and that was Neal Adams. So, just so that everyone knows a little bit more about Neal Adams, I'm going to go ahead and put to the screen who Neal Adams was. Neal Adams, who passed away on April 28, 2022, just a couple of weeks ago. He was an American comic book artist, and he's the co founder of a graphic design studio called Continuity Associates, and was a creator rights advocate. He was a big creator rights advocate who helped secure a pension and recognition for Superman creators Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. During his career, Adams co-created characters like Raja Ghul, Man-Bat, Jon Stewart, Green Lantern. He also co-created Havoc from the X-Men. After drawing a comic strip based on a television series called Ben Casey in the early 60s, Adams was hired as a freelancer by DC Comics in 1967. Later that year, he became the artist for the superhero character Deadman. He's also co-creator of Deadman in a science fiction comic book, Strange Adventures. Adams, alongside writer Dennis O'Neil, collaborated on influential runs on Batman and Green Lantern, Green Arrow, which we'll definitely be talking more about today. In the early 70s, for Batman, the duo returned Batman to his gothic roots as a contrast to the TV series. And during the Green Lantern, Green Arrow run, O'Neil and Adams introduced a mature, realistic tone through stories such as Snowbirds Don't Fly, in which Green Arrow's young ward, Speedy, Roy Harper, is revealed to have an addiction to drugs. That's a famous cover, which we'll definitely talk a little bit about. And of course, they co-created Jon Stewart. He did some time as well in Marvel. He had a run on X-Men before they blew up. He had a run on the original X-Men team. He's also done some work on the Avengers. He's famous for doing a cover of Superman and Muhammad Ali, which we'll take a look at it. He is an Eisner Award-winning Hall of Famer. He is a Harvey Awards Jack Kirby Hall of Famer, as well as he won the Inkwell Awards back in 2019. So there you have it. That is Neal Adams, and again, he died at the age of 80 on April 28th, 2022. So let's talk a little bit about him. We'll start with you, James. Tell me a little bit about what Neal Adams meant to you and who he was.
Well, Neil made a big impression on me because when I was young, I started learning to read by reading comics, and so I was familiar with Superman and Legion and things like that. But the first comic I ever bought on my own at 3 years old was this issue, Detective Comics 410, and I never saw anything like it. That dynamic cover, that realistic art, was a Neal Adams, a Denny O'Neil story, and it just I couldn't believe that comics could look like this, and it was because of this particular issue that I got for 10 cents in 1970 in March. Made me want to do comics, and I started doodling back then. And luckily, I got to meet Neal a couple years ago at a con, and told him that story. And he was very encouraging of my work. He liked looking at it. He told me to keep going at it. Um, he just seemed like a very genuine guy who really loved comics and loved to encourage people to make their own.
How about you, Daryl? What was your memories of Neil Adams from what you remember growing up as a kid and things like that?
Okay. When it comes to Neil, I had got into comics kind of late-ish. I didn't get into like 14 when I was 14 years old, and then I was at the High School of Art and Design, and there was a comic book store called the Comics Gallery, and we used to go there. And at that time, I don't think Neil was doing any monthlies at that time, like 78, 79, but his work was all over the wall in that comic book shop. And I know that my friends that was talking about like, oh, how great Neil Adams was. And then I looked for his stuff and I wanted to buy it, but I couldn't buy it because it was $25. Like the first issue of the Kree Skrull War, that thing was $25 and it nice hung up high so nobody grubby hands could get on it. And in 1979, I just did the inflation calculator. That's the equivalent of $100 today. So I didn't get a chance to see that book until the next year, like about 1980, when a friend of mine gave me like a tattered copy, of the Kree Skrull War run, because he was like growing out of comics, I guess, or he was just tired of them. But when I finally saw his work, I was like, wow. It was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, no wonder this stuff costs so much. And then it's like I had to get the rest of his stuff, But of course, that was kind of hard because there wasn't a lot of it. And then when there were copies, the price for like a 16-year-old at that time was kind of prohibitive. But when I became an adult, I was able to start purchasing like reprints and everything like that. Then, as far as Neil is concerned, I never, got to work with him or anything like that. But I did meet him a couple of times at conventions. I met him once in 2014 at New York Comic Con. And I went up to him and I, just shook his hand. I told him, look, I'm just a huge fan, which he probably heard a billion times. And then, but he was very cordial to me. And we talked about the Kree Skrull War because that for me was the Neil moment. I've come to realize later that I think he's more famous for his DC work. But because I was a Marvel guy, his X-Men and his Avengers stuff is the work that really sung to me. And so I talked to him about that, about his work on that, and he was very nice. He talked to me. He didn't have any airs or anything like that because I've heard that he could be kind of like demanding at these conventions, but he was cool with me, and I really appreciated it. The last time I saw him was at a Comic Con that was at my school, at my alma mater, High School of Art and Design. He had a big booth there, and I was able to just say hi, just once again, just shake his hand and just say, I love your work and everything, and he was nice and everything, and I was just happy to be able to just be in the presence of greatness.
Yeah. My I came into Neil Adams late as well in my life. Only because, you know, when I got into comics, it was at the boom of, you know, I guess we could say the 90s Renaissance, right? The Todd McFarlane's, the Jim Lees, the Rob Liefelds, all those guys were the thing. But what was going on with in Neal's side, he was very big in the indie scene with continuity. If you remember continuity, Megalith, I believe, is the character. He created all these characters that were going on. It was, and when I started looking at his work as an artist, right? So before, as a fan, he was, to me, he felt very much the same as everybody else because everybody else was very flashy at that time anyway, right? But when I actually started looking at his work and then looking at his body of work during the time he was out, like when he was at his peak, I guess you could say he was like at his peak, but he never really lost his peak. But really at his peak in the early 70s, you know, late 60s, early 70s, and looking at all the other books that were going on, he was the top. He was on the top of everybody's list. He was the superstar of superstars when it came to artists, right? He was the guy that everybody wanted on their book, right? And you know, he did have his run in X-Men, which I'll go ahead and show off in a couple of seconds here. But he had his run on X-Men, and he co-created a very popular X-Men character that a lot of people didn't know he co-created. So let me go ahead and share everybody who that person is while I get the window. Let's see here. I believe it's this one. Let's see if it pops up. It's not letting me do it. So I've just got to do a screen share. So give me 1 second. That's perfect. I'll do the screen share. So he created this popular character that, you know, a lot of people didn't know about, and now doesn't want to even show it. Just my luck, right? But he created Havoc. That's who I was gonna say. Havoc was a character that I've always enjoyed. I always thought his look was so unique. In particular, he had a very particular look, and it was something. My first comic book. Speaking about first comic books, right? My first comic book featured Havoc. There it is. I got it up so everybody can see it. My first comic book featured Havoc, and Havoc was the character that was in the book. It was a Marvel tale, had Spider-Man and Thor. It was a weird Marvel team up. It was a Marvel tale. It was a reprint of a Marvel team up book that was with Thor and Spider-Man, but Havoc was there. And I always thought Havoc was like, oh, this guy looks so cool, right? And that was a Neal Adams creation. Havoc was a Neal Adams creation, the brother of Scott Summers. And I did hear a story with him, and he was sharing the story about Havoc and how when he first showed up in the movies, how he wasn't credited. It was like, everybody gets credit, but I didn't get credit. And stuff like that. So before we move forward, let me introduce to you our next guest, who he was running late from traffic purposes, but Fury Comics. What's up, dude? How you doing?
Hey, what's up, guys? How you doing?
Welcome.
Glad. I apologize. I'm splitting myself for especially for this weekend that's coming. I'm splitting myself into two. You know, so I try my best. I've been all over. It's been all over the place.
That's perfect. Fine. We're actually just starting. We were talking about Neal Adams. So.
Okay.
And in, you know, what he meant to us. So do you have anything that you like to share with us in regards to Neal Adams in particular? And then we'll talk about George a little later.
Yeah. So I have tons of stuff for Neal Adams. For me personally, Neal Adams is kind of, I want to say because let me kind of back up. The Batman animated series was my introduction to Batman in whole. That's the way Batman was introduced to me. So while I was going through that journey, Neal Adams came to me through, which is funny, through Ra's al Ghul. As crazy as that sounds, that's exactly my introduction to him. So seeing Neal Adams artwork on Ra's al Ghul and getting into exactly yes,
Ra's al Ghul.
I didn't know what kind of thing we were doing, so yeah, so. So this
look at that.
So this is kind of this is from my PC, I know, because I do deal and stuff like that, and I've had
Let me
probably
go ahead and
maybe
give
a handful of these kind of copies. But this is my
That's the one
personal-
issue I don't have.
Yeah.
Oh,
I have
that's
the
such a
other 3
great
issues
cover.
from that one.
Yeah.
I don't have that one.
So this is this means a lot to me because this is I was able to get it signed not only by Neal Adams here on the bottom, but I also got to meet Dennis O'Neil as well. So they both signed this copy, and this is
nice.
Like
That's
I said,
good,
this
that's
is
a
my
good keeper, man.
introduction to yeah, thank you. This is my introduction to Neal Adams as a kid. As we fast forward, I met Neal Adams when I started to become a dealer, and I remember my first show at oh my god, I think it was the High School of Visual Arts or something with art school that was down on around 53rd Street that they usually do like a big comic. Well, they did. I don't know if they still do it. And I was a dealer there, and he kind of wetting my feet there, and trying to be the new guy in the scene, and that's how I met Neal Adams, seeing him face to face, and just have a fanboy moment, like to see him actually face to face and going, oh, this is it, this is the guy, and it really meant a lot, and I think 9 times out of 10, I think everyone their first experience with Neal Adams is pretty genuine. He's a really down to earth guy. Very for me was very, very genuine. Very how can I say this? Just a straight shooter.
Yeah, he really was.
He's a real straight shooter. There's no hold barred with Neal Adams. If it felt as though he would just say the first thing that came into mind.
And about that in particular, as I mentioned to the guys earlier, before we went to broadcast, he was divisive for some people. Like my best friend in particular, he did not have a good experience with Neal. I'll tell you that much. But one thing I learned, actually talking to someone that was supposed to be in the show, but unfortunately because of scheduling issues, he couldn't make it. He was telling me Neal was always a businessman. And as a businessman, he was always thinking about the business and respecting the business more than anything else, right? We definitely take a moment and talk a little bit about what he did for Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, because that was very big deal what he did for them. But he was constantly in the business, and the other thing is that he was also honest. One thing that a lot of people deal with in conventions is that you have people that are inspiring artists, comic book artists coming in, and they're showing portfolios to people asking for their opinions. And I dare I say 9 times out of 10, they don't want to hear bad stuff. They want to hear that their stuff is great, that their stuff is awesome, that their work is amazing, that you're the next Jim Lee, you're the next Neal Adams, you're the next George Perez, right? They want to hear that, right? But Neal wasn't like that. Neal will be very honest with you. And that's something I took out when I started reviewing people's portfolios. The first thing I would tell people, and this is directly because of Neal, the first thing I would tell them is, do you want me to tell you the truth, or do you want me to be nice to you? Right? And again, it's one of those situations where you got to say to yourself, when you hear a statement like that, you got to say, what does he mean? Right? Because Dara, if you came to me and tell me that, right? What would your answer be? Honestly.
Oh my God. I would tell the truth. And I would be like, oh, I'm ready. Like,
right?
Gird myself.
And Neal was like that. Neal was very much like that, where he would say what he needs to say, because again, you're not going to learn if everything is, this is really nice. Yeah. This is really great. You're not going to learn.
Izzy, it's funny that you mentioned that, because he was, if you think about it, Neal could have stayed at DC and done Batman for 30 years. He only was there for like 3. From 67 to 1970 is when he was working on Batman and Detective, and then left. He would occasionally do a cover for DC and then jumped over to Marvel. But when he started Continuity Comics, it was like the first time, it was like a pre-image. He left,
it really was
one of the big 2 to start his own studio, and he brought a bunch of other artists in with him. And it's funny, Larry Hama worked for him at Continuity, and he gave an anecdote exactly with what you're talking about, where he's working on a deadline, and Neal was looking over his shoulder, and he said to him, paraphrasing, you're just phoning that in. And he's like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you have like 3 or 4 different faces that you use, and you're doing it quickly because you have a deadline. Why don't you just try and make something a little bit more interesting? And Larry was like, well, yeah, but it's a deadline. But I understood exactly what he was talking about. He knew he was your boss, and he wanted you to make that deadline, but he also wanted you to give your best. So what Larry was trying to say was he always pushed you to give your best.
Yeah, he was definitely like that. I think, and that's something I really respected about Neal in particular, is that he would be honest with you because you had to hear it. You had to hear it, right? You had to hear the truth, because again, you're not going to improve if you don't hear the truth, right? I just said something that came out, right? He always tells you the truth, and it was the hard truth, right? Yeah. That's my boy Jake, man. What's up, Jake? How you doing, man? He could be brutal with people, but
absolutely, absolutely.
But he did it because from what I'm hearing, what I learned is he did it out of respect for the industry. He respected the industry more than most people even cared to consider it. And this is a guy that at 80 was still doing conventions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I was going to his website, and they, it hasn't really been updated for obvious reasons, I'm sure. No. But he's scheduled to be on the show in May. That's how many. You know what I mean? That's the type of person he was, that he was doing cons even now. He didn't have to. He was sick. He was actually sick. It was well documented that he was sick. Similar to, maybe not to the same extent as George Perez, which we'll talk about, but he was still sick, and eventually it got to him.
As you guys are chatting, I'm just going to hold up some of my Neal issues.
Oh, I'm going to show that book now.
That's the only book I don't have that. I don't have that. It has not crossed my line as a collector or as a dealer. It's on my wish list, really.
I was lucky to grab these, years ago, and I can't imagine trying to get these now.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Yep. I have that as well. Yeah.
Good. Just keep talking.
Yeah. So yeah, with Neal Adams in particular, let's take a moment now to just talk a little bit about his.
Oh yes.
What we call his style, right? What many in the industry call style. He actually was not a component of the term style. He actually didn't like the term style. I was watching a sci-fi video, and there we go. That's the good one.
That's Neal Adams. When you think of Neal Adams, that is the cover.
Yeah, and what was awesome about his look is that he was an artist in the late 60s, early 70s. That's the moment he peaked. Yeah. Or better yet, that's when he came to the scene. That's probably a better word, right? Came to the scene. With that being said, his artwork was nothing like anything else that was out there.
Nothing.
Yeah. It was what we call detailed.
Very detailed. Yes. Very detailed.
And it's funny that we're going to talk about George, but the reality of it was the precursor of what George will become, right? So George was the next generation that followed, right? But Neal Adams
I think when you're talking about that, George was able to take what Neal did and did it one step further. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much what he did, and he just did it because it's those two artists for me guys, they didn't really have a so-called style. It felt as though it was just better. It was something better. It was like one of those things that it was for me during that time, it was something that you could distinguish like that. Mm-hmm. It was really one of those things like, oh, wow, this is Neal Adams. You already knew just before you even looked at it this is Neal Adams. You could tell, and I think that's one of the good features of an artist, that you don't even have to, you could see a cover and you can tell before you even have the cover in hand, you know who did it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And he was one of those guys. He was definitely Neal Adams was definitely one of those guys that when you saw his work, you knew it was Neal Adams.
Right.
To this day, you
Yes.
see his work and you still know it's Neal Adams, right? One of the characters he helped create was this guy,
Yeah.
Deadman.
Yes.
And you know what? When it came to Deadman, I learned something really cool about Deadman. He had a story already planned for Deadman that happened years later. And it had to do with Raja al Ghul, it had to do with his family. He had a story prepared, right? And what was so great about it is that he was still a writer. He was an artist / writer, which, you know, at that time it was like either you're an artist or you're a writer. And he was one of those guys that was both. But his work with Denny O'Neil was just amazing, right?
Oh yeah, that's
the glue, right? That's, you know,
that's what was it. It's one of those kind of partnership, like, you know, the modern
Standing
version,
Kirby,
you know,
Standing
that's the
Dicko.
beginning of, like, you know, we have Snyder and Capullo, and we have Cates and Stegman, you know, like it's one of those, you know, it's and to me those stories are Batman stories, you know, those are the ones that I grew up on as well, you know, those are the stories that got me into Ra's al Ghul, got me into seeing a different side of the Joker that we never used to see before, especially during that time, you know. Yeah. And to kind of hit what I really loved was not only was the Ra's al Ghul stories, but I also loved when Dennis would do those kind of crime noir kind of stories, like which was mostly in Detective Comics stuff, and it was really, really good for me, and I really liked those stories, man, where it was more like it wasn't too dark, because that time we didn't really get the Frank Miller Batman, but it was dark enough where it felt like, ooh, what is Batman getting into now? What is the next step, you know? And it felt really dark and the kind of gritty at which, you know, I don't think that time Batman was it yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. You know, James, tell me a little bit about this Joker. What made this Joker so important?
Joker up until that point was, I don't want to say comedy relief, but he would do gimmick stories where he was, you know, things were like amusement park themed and things like that. But in that particular issue, I think it's called the 5-way draw or something like that. Joker was a homicidal maniac. He was a killer straight up. I believe in that story he was betrayed by his gang, so he decided to go after them and kill them one by one, and he almost gets them all. And it was also the first time in a long time we had a physically imposing Joker. Even though Neal drew him extremely thin and wiry, like a basketball type build, he does knock out Batman. He gets him by surprise and hits him from behind. And right then and there, he could have killed him. I forgot how he got out of it. But yeah, Joker was straight up killing people in that issue. And it surprised a lot of people who were just watching a few years earlier the Cesar Romero Joker on the TV series.
Yeah, and, you know, again, just looking at the art, first of all, looking at the artwork, right? It was Joker. He looked like the clown, like he normally would, but there was something a little more added to it. He was more sinister looking, where before he was more clown-like, right? So Darrow, what can you tell me about, you know, about your thoughts of his Joker in particular?
Well, there won't be too much because I was a Marvel guy, and so I didn't look at the Batman stuff. I could tell you about Havoc.
All right, tell me about Havoc.
You know,
tell me about Havoc, man. I want to hear.
Talk to you about Havoc. In the case that those circles and everything. I mean, that was like a power signature that I never saw before.
Yeah.
And it was innovative. It was just spectacular.
Yeah.
And it was just like, wow. Like, was he on something to think of that? I'm not saying that he was, but it just made me wonder, like, what kind of imagination did he have to be able to make those circles? And it just looked like such power coming from this character, this new character.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say, Doug. When I see those very early X-Men when he was able to get on Marvel's X-Men stuff, and it is something really simple, and that's how you know how great of an artist that you are. You're able to take just a simple circles. That's really what it is. It's just circles to kind of
because Havoc was very simplistic costume.
Yeah, it was a very simplistic character. It's really, there's no big. It's not like Storm where she's calling hurricane winds and things like that. Just a simple circle to demonstrate his power. But those circles and the amount of the way that it was drawn, it felt as though it gave so much power. You know what I'm saying? It gave so much power along with the coloring, and it was done like you actually felt it, and that's I can say was quote unquote Neal style. He was able to take something so simple and make it though. It gave it feeling. It gave it
energy.
Energy. There you go. It gave its own energy to it. So you're like, whoa. Especially especially when you first see it as well. You're like, whoa, what is going on here? This is
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Let me ask you guys a question. I think a lot of people would say that Neal Adams is an incredibly influential artist. Who do you think today is the new Neal Adams?
That's
because there are
great
people that definitely do the Jim Lee stuff, the Todd McFarlane stuff. There are people that emulate those guys because that's who they were brought up with. Who's doing Neal Adams today?
That's a great question because
that's a really great
today's landscape is a lot to do with obviously the 90s image guys, right?
Yes.
But if you go again, I think when it comes to Neal in particular, he is multi-generational in his style. So, again, we talk about Kirby, right? You could throw Neal Adams in that list as influential. If it wasn't for Neal Adams, we wouldn't have detail in comics. I'm going to be honest. We wouldn't have details in comics if it wasn't for Neal Adams.
I agree with that.
So I think he's the precursor to what we ended up seeing in the image run. Now, those that followed him, right? So there's two in particular that were considered the Neal copycats, even though they weren't copycats. Mike Grengel and Bill Sienkiewicz. And Bill Sienkiewicz really didn't copy Neal's style. Because again, talking about style, that was one of those things. And Sienkiewicz was very close to Neal. But Sienkiewicz learned from Neal. So he took some of the things he learned, but he ended up adapting other genres to make his style happen. So we wouldn't have Sienkiewicz if it wasn't for Neal. We definitely wouldn't have had Mike Grengel if it wasn't for Neal. Before we move forward, because we are going to go to George in a minute, I want to talk about two more things because again, I wanted to keep it, guys, if you're watching, I wanted to keep this a half hour, but unfortunately I can't because there's so much to talk about. But I do want to talk about his run with Denny O'Neil when it comes to this specific book, and that is Green Lantern, Green Arrow. Yeah. These are two covers in particular that were very, very important. The first one has to deal with drug addiction, and the second one had to deal with the first appearance of Jon Stewart. So, James, you're my historian, man. Tell me what's the deal with Green Lantern, Green Arrow from what you know.
I'll try and make this brief. Back then, both characters weren't doing very well, and it was one of those cases where DC decided to let this new guy, Denny O'Neil, take a shot with it. And he decided that we should bring some socially relevant issues into comics. So they teamed up Green Lantern, who was Hal Jordan was a conservative guy. He thought that, he was one of those guys that, I don't care why you're a criminal, you're doing crime, I have to stop you. Whereas Green Arrow, who was the liberal character, was like, no, you don't understand. These people are living in poverty and they have to do what they can to get by. And putting those together gave great conflict. But then you had additional issues thrown in where you had that famous image of the African American guy who was who confronted Hal Jordan and says, I heard you did all this for the orange folks in this planet. You did all the things for the purple folks on this planet. What are you doing for the black and brown folks? And he didn't have an answer.
I remember.
Yeah, and it was a very stunning image. You didn't see that in comics back then in the 70s. And then the other issue was drugs, and drugs was creeping into urban areas, and they made Speedy, a very ironic name.
I know.
A Green Arrow sidekick. They made him a heroin addict.
When these guys pick the names,
it wasn't done on purpose.
The round table was thinking.
Yeah.
Like, what with this kid and these drugs? What's going on right now? What's the top drug? Speedy. Got it. That sounds good. Put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so funny looking at it now, right? This was 1970s. This was the 70s. This was 40, 50 years ago. Yeah. And this information is still very relevant to this day. But the political landscape today is insane how it is, right? You got the right wings and the left wing. And again, I'm not one to talk about politics in the show, but there is some major conflict going on that has affected our country that was very prevalent in the 70s, but it reared its ugly head now today, right?
Let's also remember this is also influential throughout the industry. It was soon after this that they had 2 issues dealing with drugs in Spider-Man.
Yep. And they couldn't get the code in it.
They took the code off. The comics code, because it dealt with drugs. And I tell you, that's a direct line from these issues.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the important thing. And one of the things that him and Denny O'Neil were influential, of course, they brought up relevant topics into comics that didn't exist. Comics were all about wham bam, thank you, man, save the girl and all that stuff, the damsel in distress and all that. But one of the characters they definitely both introduced was Jon Stewart, who by many people's standards is their Green Lantern, right?
Yeah, definitely that's the Green Lantern I grew up with. So that's the one I grew up with. Yeah.
But what was very interesting about his Green Lantern was that he felt that he didn't need a mask. So he's like, I don't need this, and he took his mask out. You know what I mean? That's how influential he was. Another influential character that was going on in the 70s, 60s, and 70s was a man by the name of Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah. That classic cover, man.
This is and this cover in particular I love because this was the dawn of the as we call today the Easter egg, or the right? Because if you look at this book, obviously you see Superman fighting, Muhammad Ali, and in an actual world where if Superman was real, we know Superman will win. But of course, in typical comics fashion, they weaken Superman for this fight. But what I love is all the people that are in the crowd were actually based off of real people. You could see Jimmy Carter right underneath Superman's knees. Pretty much people from that era. I believe that's Jesse Jackson to me. I don't know. It looks like Jesse Jackson to me. Well, right. So there's a lot of people in this page that Neal just said, I'm going to put them in the comic book.
Yeah.
Now, we should mention one thing. One of the criticisms that they hit with Neal was later reprints of his stories. He would actually redraw a lot of panels. So this particular cover you're showing right now is vastly different from the original cover, because he redrew a lot of these people to give them more detail. I don't know if he changed any of the faces, but in the original cover, there was a lot of the DC staff in the crowd. So Dick Giordano, and Julie Schwartz and Carmen Infantino were all there.
Mm-hmm. I want to say this ball-headed figure right underneath the knees of Muhammad Ali, that could be Denny. It's possibly Denny.
Maybe. It kind of,
It looks like Denny's head. I don't know. But one of the things, since we're looking at a Superman picture in particular, and Stephen Price, thanks for watching the show, Stephen.
Oh, that's right. We didn't even hit. I don't know. Well, I don't know if you guys hit that with the
We
whole
talked to
Superman stuff.
we
Oh, you guys
we
did. Yeah,
brushed
that
upon
was
it. We brushed upon it. We didn't talk it. But Neal Adams, one of the things that I definitely want
definitely
to
Steph.
share and talk and discuss is the importance of Neal Adams to the business in general.
Yes.
He was a huge component, like you said. He was like the image guy before Image. So if it wasn't for Neal, obviously Image was something a little different, but Neal was a huge component of making sure people got credit for their work. So he worked very diligently to help Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster get their credit for creating Superman and get their name on the byline for the movie. If it wasn't for Neal's work on being an activist on their behalf, it wasn't to say that he did all the work. I'm just saying he was very influential in making it happen.
He was a big voice for it. He was definitely a big voice for it, which the best thing was just seeing that documentary. That's how I even knew about the information and how they thoroughly went through that, and seeing Neal in almost every court hearing and even they were showing cons back in the day and how he had panels just talking about the injustice to those guys and what needs to be done. So he definitely was he was the image guy before Image guy, in the sense of looking out for artists and what was right to be done for artists and their right to be compensated well.
One of the biggest audiences that he got was the Mike Douglas show back in the day. It was a talk show, and he was on there with Siegel and Shuster before an audience of millions, because remember there was only 3 networks back then and occasional local channels, and millions of people got to hear about how DC screwed over Siegel and Shuster, and millions went to their defense.
It was also in the papers too, in a bunch of papers as well. Yeah, I remember that. That's what they were saying. It was always in the papers as well. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely one of the biggest highlights for Neal, and sometimes people forget. Like I said, seeing just Steph bringing that up, I totally slipped my mind. And he did that. He was definitely influential, not only for them, but I think for kind of bringing that kind of spirit to.
Yeah, we lost him for a second. So I'm sure he'll be back. It happens. That's live streaming, guys. So with that being said, let's say one last thing that we want to share about Neal to us. So Daryl, I'm going to start with you. There we go. Fury's back. Good. There you go. We lost you for a second. So starting with you, Daryl, one last thing you could say about Neal and what he meant to you and this industry.
For me, Neal, by way of his work, pushed me to be better. There's like a lot of artists that I consider, targets, like as an artist, like who would I want to be like? Not necessarily like to draw exactly like them, but to be able to, do my work to a point where, I could be happy with it if it was compared to someone else's. And Neal was at the top for me, the very top. And my work is nowhere near Neal Adams' thing, or nowhere near.
I don't think nobody's is.
Yeah, because like he was going with that question earlier, like who's today's Neal? I can't think of anyone, and that's not a slight meant towards today's artists or anything like that. But it just seems like today's art, and I have to confess, I don't look at or read comics like I used to, but the ones that I do, the ones that I do look at, there seems to be like a push for minimalism. Mm-hmm. And I cannot see Neal Adams doing minimalistic work.
You very much are going to talk a little. We're definitely going to talk about our next guy when we talk about not a minimalism, right?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
Okay, so but Fury, one thing you could tell me about Neal Adams that you remember or you love.
One thing I remember from Neal Adams is the second time I met him. I met him at being that I'm from New York, and there's a little comic shop called Royal Collectibles down in Queens. So I met him the second time and doing a signing. And during that signing, he was able to get a crowd of people, and it felt like we're in his presence, because it felt as though that he was giving like details on what's happening with him. It felt like I was almost like in comic church. Neil's giving a sermon on different characters and doing almost a small Q&A, and it felt so genuine, and just seeing his responses to different questions, and it felt so wholesome. And then fast forward, actually meeting him, and actually him remembering me from the first time we met and saying, "Hey, how you doing? How you feeling?" and I think I at the time I didn't have any keys or anything. I think I brought because I later on that year I was getting into, I had like a deadman fever, and I brought, where's it, right here? So I had like a deadman fever. I wanted to get into Deadman and wondering what's with that character, and try to read up as much as I can about him. And I brought this out. And I had him sign this for me, and we chatted. We small chatted about Deadman and what was his expectations about the character. And I think at that time, he was actually writing. He was writing and doing his own book on Deadman, which came out. I can't remember the short stories that Deadman had. That's mini series that he did with Deadman. I can't remember what it was. They did not recent. I want to say maybe a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was the story I was talking about. That he had the story already set up. He had it always planned for years, and he just.
Oh, that was the one. That's the one that. Okay, so that's those stories there that they were able to give. DC was able to give him to do like a small mini series, and he was talking about that.
Yeah.
And that's my big memory for him.
James, what about you? What's one thing you could say about Neal before we move to our next honoree or tribute?
Well, Neal brought a kind of realism to comics that weren't there before. I mean, I had never seen a Batman that looked like that. No. He looked like a guy that was like almost like your dad. He was there to go, ho hum, I'll save you, innocent bystander. But here was a Batman that had emotion. He was dark, and another thing we should mention about Neal's art was his attention to light.
Yes.
He would show you where the lights and the shadows would be and where the light source was coming from. And, these are just iconic covers that nobody else was doing. But as far as talking about artists that emulate his style, I would point people to Astro City and Brent Anderson. Brent Anderson, he's been around for a long time, but if you want to look at somebody who is still doing that type of art, I would point you to any issue of Astro City. And I think to another extent, I would say somebody like David Finch. David Finch with his Moon Knight issues reminded me of Neal.
Well, you got Stephen Platt, who's very, very much like that as well. Again, when it comes to ultra detail, a lot of these guys owe Neal that credit. When it comes to, a splash page, people think a lot about someone like a Jack Kirby or Steranko or something like that of that era. But Neal was the next big thing that followed those two, right? So he owned the 70s as far as I'm concerned. That was Neal's decade. And it didn't stop at the 70s. But what he ended up doing is he ended up saying, he pretty much went with the route of, you know what? I've done my Marvel, I've done my DC, which a lot of people are doing today now, that they got their chance to do Marvel and DC. That Marvel and DC is almost now like what we aspired before as we want to get to the top, where it's Marvel and DC. Now it's more like Marvel and DC is just a stepping stone to get what we really want to do, and that our creator own.
If you think about it, I forgot to mention this before, but when Neal left comics, he did a lot of movie posters.
Yeah, he was into advertising. He did a lot of advertising work.
If you
He,
get a chance, Google Neal Adams movie posters, and you'll see some amazing work.
Yeah.
He did the poster for Westworld.
Well, he did work for
Really?
M&M's.
Wow.
So he was always busy doing something. If it wasn't comic books, it was in
Yeah.
advertising, it was in marketing, and again, so much stuff. And one last thing I'll share with everybody about Neal Adams, that what he did was, when you would go to a convention, there was times he would just sing at you. And people didn't know what he was doing. He was just serenading people. That was
I've
the
heard
type of
stories
character.
about that. Yeah.
That was just part of the type of person he was. He was always on cue. That's one thing I can say about Neal Adams. But now let's talk about Neal Adams. I have to say a Neal Adams follower. He came almost immediately after Neal Adams. His big run happened really at the start of the late 70s and the early 80s. And once he came out, there was no stopping this man. And who we're talking about is the late great George Perez, who we lost this weekend. So I'm gonna put the poster up so that everybody can see it. And James, tell us a little bit about George Perez.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
All right, just let me know when it is up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So before I do that, we have to change the image. That's there. But just so everybody can see, there's James' moment with Mr. Neal Adams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that infamous blue shirt he always used to have.
Oh yeah, the blue shirt.
That's like his uniform.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so George was born in 1954 in the South Bronx, fellow New Yorker. Puerto Rican. He was an assistant under the artist Rich Buckler. And over at Marvel, he started assisting Rich Buckler and doing the magazine Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. This was his first issue. It was on this book. It was a magazine style. It wasn't comic sized, where he created the White Tiger, which was the first Puerto Rican hero. This cover is actually by Ed Norm, I believe. But it was with Bill Mantlo, the writer, that they created the White Tiger. And these were other ancillary characters called the Sons of the White Tiger. After that, he alternated between different books. They put him on Avengers. This was his first issue, 141. And you could see his style immediately in those pages right there. To me, he drew the best Beast.
Oh, I was just about to say that he did do the best.
He made the Beast an Avenger, not I think of him as an Avenger, not as an X-Man. But there you go.
I'm torn. I'm really torn. I do like him as an X-Men, but that's probably because I grew up when he was a very they changed the storyline for Beast during my time when Jim Lee was doing X-Men.
Right.
So I'm so used to that X-Men, but when I actually picked those stories up from George Perez and seeing what Beast was, I felt the Beast was like so fun. He was like such a fun character.
Oh,
these covers of these later 70s Avengers, you could see that style of heavily detailed and putting in tons and tons of characters. And during this run, he created Taskmaster.
Yep.
And then he was over on Fantastic Four, which is very crazy if you think about it. Here's a guy who in 75 was working on Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. And just a year later, he's alternating between their two top line books, Avengers and Fantastic Four. There's George Perez right there doing a great looking thing. It was after that that he got his first regular series, working with David Kraft for, believe it or not, Logan's Run. And they had caricatures of George and Dave there for the book. And meanwhile, he kept working on Fantastic Four, continuing alternating between FF and Avengers through 1980, including the Korvac saga with Jim Shooter. It was on this issue, Fantastic Four Annual 14, where he first met and teamed up with Marv Wolfman. It was after that he jumped over to DC in 1980, doing individual issues of Flash and GL, Green Lantern, and then getting onto Justice League, which is that was his dream book. He always wanted to do Justice League.
And you
and
can
then
tell
finally,
by the art too.
Yeah, he finally got his chance. And there was an artist named Dick Dillon he was a Justice League artist for like 12 years until one day, all of a sudden, boom, he just died at 52 suddenly, which was a heartbreak for DC. The very next month, boom, there was George on Justice League for this issue, doing the Apocalypse Now saga with Darkseid. It was, I should note that it was during this period that the covers were done by Jim Starlin, and Rich Buckler, his old mentor, was alternating the art on Justice League. So George would do a book, and then Rich would do a book, and back and forth, culminating in this, what he was really known for, these beautiful wraparound covers and this example's from Justice League 200. Now, the same month that he was doing this, November 1980, was when he started working on New Teen Titans with Marv Wolfman. He did this as a favor to them because he really just wanted to stay in Justice League. That's all he cared about. Now, Marv Wolfman took the existing 1960s characters of the Titans with Robin and Wonder Girl and Kid Flash, but then created these 4 new characters: Cyborg, Starfire, Raven, and Changeling. Beast Boy was really from Doom Patrol, but essentially was new to the Titans.
Yeah.
And that's what got George interested, was these new characters, especially Cyborg. And Marv was like, you flesh him out. He's from your area of the city. You're from the Bronx. He's all yours. And they started co-plotting together. It was during this period they created the Terminator, who was on the second issue. There's Terminator in all of his glory. More of the Terminator. Now, it was on this. Wasn't that issue? It was this issue, A Day in the Lives of the Titans, issue 8, where George loved talking about, this is when he first met the woman who would become his wife. And it was while drawing this issue where they focused on the normal street lives of the characters that he really grew to love the Titans and just left Justice League to focus on this and really put his heart and soul into this. And he was married to his wife for 38 years.
Yeah.
It was
wow.
Then after this, he left the Titans to work on Crisis with Marv Wolfman. It was his 1984. Rich Buckler, his old mentor, took over the art on Titans. You could see that they kept this close friendship going. And it was there you had these incredible layouts where George just loved putting every single character he could think of to fill every single square inch of the book. And these are the characters that were created for Crisis. Working very closely with inker Jerry Ordway, who brought a very nice extra layer of detail to his work. This was opportunities where George would always say, you should draw characters differently. If you're going to have the 2 different Supermen, they should look different features. And he always figured that they even flew differently, where the Earth 1 Superman would fly more like Christopher Reeve, and the Earth 2 Superman flew more like George Reeves. And so we have more crazy detailed covers with multitude of characters. And this is a real distinguishing characteristic between him and Neal. Neal would just have like 1 or 2 people really showing that emotion and conflict between 2 characters. But George is like, I'm throwing in everybody. Everybody's there.
He said everybody and everything.
Everybody and everything.
If I could fit it on a page, I think there was I can't remember what issue was it, but I think there has been many issues where you can barely see the character, but you can tell by the costume it's barely fitting on the page, but he just squeezed them in that page, and you see it, and it's done so well. I'm not even gonna lie. He was able
did
to
he
add
really
that.
need to put all those people in this background? No, but he wanted to.
He wanted to. Like it was. I don't know if it was a challenge to himself, to his craft, but he was able to do that, and very few artists could do that. I can only remember the only thing I can think of that has that many kind of artists. Is my favorite artist is Romita, when he will do those big Marvel kind of introduction to characters, and he will try to fit the whole Marvel universe. That's the only thing I can think of during that time. Those are the only two artists that I can think of that ever did that. But George just did it. But George, just one step up from Romita, because he was able to fit so much, not only characters but the environment, the interiors of the different, pretty much the interiors of the art that's coming out of there as well. Like, it's just so amazing, especially when he does these space scenes and especially in Teen Titans, when there's like so much action going on, you kind of get engulfed into the pages. And I think
it's funny, this particular cover.
It looked
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and it looked right. It looked correct.
Yeah.
It didn't look disjointed or anything like that. It looked the way it should look.
That's right too. And also, not only light, I don't think George ever drew anything dark. Even Batman, Batman is sorry. So even Batman was such a light character as well. Usually we see Batman and some type of lighting, very to the shadows. But even drawing Batman, George was able to just bring light to everything.
And this particular image is one of the most iconic covers he ever did. But it's been done so many other times. You could probably trace this image back to even, I think there was an X-Men issue, not the one with Cyclops and Jean Grey, which of course is very similar to this. But I think there was another one prior to that with Havoc, I think, where Neal Adams did a similar cover. But this one's been done several times. I think, Daryl, didn't you do an homage to this cover?
Did I do? No, not to that one. I did some Neal Adams homages, and I did like about two George ones. One with like the Hawkeye, the one from Avengers 172, I think it was, with Hawkeye with the arrow.
Yes, with Ant-Man.
With Ant-Man, yeah.
No, not with Ant-Man. It was Avengers 172, I believe it was, where Hawkeye, it was the return of Hawkeye, and he was standing there all by himself, and there's 4 floating heads.
Oh, yes, I remember that one, yeah.
Yeah, that one I did.
And it's funny that not only this is a very well done, well aped cover where other people did their own version to it. Mm-hmm. I love this photo of George.
Yeah, there's a couple of images of there's actually an image floating around of someone holding George.
Really?
Yeah. Like Superman's actually holding George, and someone put it up, especially with what just happened this weekend.
Okay, so to move on from this, it was after that he did this this issue. He only did the first half of the issue, the first part of it with Alan Moore, when they were ending Superman after the end of Crisis and John Byrne was going to reboot him. They did a 2-issue series where Alan Moore wrote the ending, the last Superman story, and George inked over. He didn't normally ink over people, but he inked over Kurt Swan for this first issue. So it's really worth picking up just to see this one particular issue of seeing the old guard of Kurt Swan and the new guard of, at least back then in the 80s, George Perez. And of course, after that, he went in 1987 to do Wonder Woman. DC were rebooting the big 3. John Byrne, like I said, was doing Superman. You had Frank Miller doing Batman Year One. and prior to that, Dark Knight. But Wonder Woman, nobody was really interested in. You had writers Greg Potter and Len Wein with editor Janice Rice who were pushing this book, but Perez walked in and says, "You know what? I'll do it," because no one ever took the time to actually think about her. And he said that he was inspired by Walt Simonson's Thor in the way that Simonson brought mythology into the book. And so he's like, why doesn't somebody do that with Wonder Woman with Greek Roman mythology? So that's what he did. And he also brought in, believe it or not, the influence of the Ray Harryhausen, Sinbad, and the mythology films like Clash of the Titans and Jason the Argonauts, mostly because he loved drawing monsters. But you could definitely say that the movie, the Wonder Woman movie, and the director just came out and said that she wanted it to look like a George Perez comic. So that was the basis for making the film. The weird thing is that even though he's so associated with Wonder Woman, he only drew the book for the first 2 years. He wound up staying on as a writer for 5. In between these times, he was doing other things, like he worked with John Byrne on Action Comics number 600, where Superman and Wonder Woman famously share a kiss. And it's weird to see John Byrne pencils with George Perez inks. You can tell a little bit of both of their styles right on this page right here.
Well, you could definitely see it in the final panel that it's definitely George's ink, because he does have a way of drawing rib cages.
Yeah.
So you could see the rib cage. It's funny because when you look at the other panel right opposite it, right, the 2 panels in the bottom, the one opposite, if you look at their faces, you see John Byrne face, right? It's very distinct the way he draws faces.
Yeah, and noses too.
Yeah, faces and noses are there's a very distinct way he does it. But when you look at the body sculpture, it's George Perez.
Right.
So
other things that he did was a lot of people forget he was also part of the team that introduced Tim Drake, the third Robin, also with Marv Wolfman. Then there was a little bit of problems that he had with DC on this book, War of the Gods, in 1991. DC editorial kept making changes to his storyline, and without him being told, he was taken off of Wonder Woman and given to another writer, which didn't sit too well with him. So he jumped ship for DC and went over to Marvel. Now, over at Marvel, he wound up working with Peter David, doing Hulk Future Imperfect, where the Maestro was created. He did things like he worked with Peter David on a book called Saxon Violence, which was for their mature themes label called Epic that Marvel had for a short time.
it was almost like their Vertigo at the time, but not exactly.
Yeah, that only lasted a couple of issues.
They tried. That's what it was.
Yeah.
But Epic was actually a good brand. I really did like Epic.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
And he also worked.
Wolverine Havoc, man. Wolverine Havoc. Let's pick that
no,
up.
no.
Meltdown is great.
He also
doesn't sound good.
He also did a year on Silver Surfer, which was very science fiction oriented. A lot of these books were very hit and miss. And then all of a sudden, boom, he gets on Infinity Gauntlet, doing the first couple of issues with Jim Starlin, who was a friend of his.
The masterpiece.
Yes. He wound up not being able, because Perez is one of those guys, he can't just do one book. He has to do multiple books. So
I think it's just him trying to fit so many characters in one page, and someone's telling him, "You just can't do it. You got to put it in a different book." And he goes, "Okay."
So he only did a few issues of this, and Ron Limb took over.
Yeah, I think he did 3. He did 3 issues, and Ron Limb took over the book.
Yeah. Then there's also this iconic cover of Thanos. Then he did other work with some independents like CrossGen, which I think this is some of his most beautiful work. It's the coloring really added a layer to George Perez's work that wasn't there before. it was books like this, and I mean, that's just absolutely gorgeous.
Wow. I never
You could
seen
probably
that
find
before.
these books in like dollar bins.
They are.
And yeah, and if the stories don't grab you, I mean, just look at that art. Just freaking gorgeous.
That's amazing.
And then he also did stuff for Malibu. Now, it's odd. I'm going to get back to CrossGen later. It plays a significant role in his most famous work, which I'll get to later. But after that, he went back to Marvel, working with Kurt Busiek in 1998 to do what I think is the best version of the Avengers there was up until this point. I mean, this is like iconic George Perez Avengers, where he throws in every character he can. And I don't know about you, but to me, when I look at the Avengers films, it's these books.
Well, one of the things he did in particular when it came to the Avengers, more so that even the Justice League, and there it is, that you know,
that's the cover.
So when you think about the lineup, right? When you think about the lineup, what he did with what he and Kurt did with the Avengers, and he was the right guy for the Avengers, right? So let's go ahead and just remove this so people could start seeing us for a little bit. Not that we're so great.
We're not as great as his artwork, but yeah.
But one of the things that he did in his style, in his approach, and why Avengers suited so well for him was the fact that when Avengers was created, it was created in the same like as Justice League, where it was really there was never really every arc had their set of Avengers, right? And Avengers was like, okay, here are the top heroes. They're gonna get together, and then we're gonna get some other heroes, and then we're just gonna keep evolving the group. And with him in particular, what was great about George Perez is that he could draw anybody, and one of the best things we talk about his detail, of course, and we talk about the fact that he could draw 100 characters in a page, which is totally he could do. It was the fact that everyone was different. Everyone looked different. Not a single character looked the same.
He has a famous. He has a famous anecdote he liked to tell at conventions, and I know I can see this panel in my head. But he once drew Captain America, Ant-Man, and Hawkeye together in a room with their masks off, and all three of those guys are square-jawed, blonde, white guys, and he wanted to show that you could tell who they are without their masks. So he drew them slightly differently. I don't know how effective it was, but that was his pride and joy of having different looks for different characters.
Yeah, and the reality of it is with him in particular, he can, how when you see Batman and Superman together and Batman without his mask, most people draw them and they look exactly the same. There's no distinction, right? Even in the cartoons, there's no distinction. Right? If you ever watch Batman the Animated Series, well, really, when you watch the series that followed, and they put Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent in the same room, with the exception of the glasses, they were almost identical. And
absolutely.
And but what George would do is that he did the little things that no one else thinks about, right? For example, Scarlet Witch. She should have curly hair. Same thing with Wonder Woman, right? She should look Greek. Wonder Woman's a Greek character. Most people don't draw her Greek. She should look Greek. So he would do the thing with the nose. He would make a nose like slightly crooked to make it look a certain way. He would make a jawbone a certain way. That was the epitome of what he did. Not only that he was able to capture great, characters in a single page, because again, what is Crisis? What is Infinity Gauntlet? He could do what is Avengers, which is the one book that you didn't show, which is this one in particular, Avengers in JLA, which is
I was
actually
just going to get to.
Yeah, I know. I knew it was coming.
It was the next image.
It was the next image. But what's interesting about this one is that this is not the first he did it. They came beforehand. So James, keep talking to us. Get to this part there. So I'm going to give
Okay.
you the screen again.
Oh, the screen's on again?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to try and bring this down very quickly because it's a very complicated story. But basically in 1983 was the first time that they approached him to do a Justice League Avengers crossover. And he was adamant with DC. He was like, I'm doing this book. It's me. And back then, there was also the X-Men Teen Titans crossover. And it always bothered me. How come I love Walt Simon's artwork? I think what he did on Teen Titans X-Men is amazing. I love it. It's one of my favorite books. But I always wondered, how come Perez didn't draw it? And I read an interview with him, and in the comics interview special issue that was devoted just to the Justice League Avengers, what happened was Jerry Conway, who was a longtime writer of Justice League, they gave him the assignment to write the book. He wasn't that familiar with all the characters, and he wrote them in a way that wasn't consistent with what was going on at Marvel at the time. So editorial at Marvel said, this is not acceptable. So they're like, fine, okay, we'll find somebody else. And they, I forgot who else they brought in to tweak it up. Maybe it was Roy Thomas they brought in, and he tweaked it, and everybody was very happy with it. But for some reason, and it's a much longer story than this, but Jim Shooter never got around to approving it. And George, these are George's words, not mine, but George thought that Jim had too much of an ego, that why wasn't the book brought initially to him, because somebody else was the editor on the book. And he thought Jim was having an ego problem. Whether or not it was, this is what George said publicly. So he said that, okay, either you let me do the book with Teen Titans or I'm not doing either one of them. And they kept dragging their feet. Only about 22 pages of the book was drawn. Here's one of them. From what I could tell from the story, and you can see these 22 pages if you get the deluxe omnibus of the later series or that comics interview special issue, it begins with, for some reason, I think Batman gets transported to Marvel and he winds up fighting all the Avengers. And it's not until I think Scarlet Witch takes a building down on him that he gets taken out. And that's where his story stops. But George is like, you know what? You guys have been dragging your feet. Shooter, I don't want to do with Shooter. I'm off. I'm done. And he walked away, and that's why Simonson got X-Men Teen Titans. Now, later on, when Kurt Busiek told him it was on again, he accepted that the change in editorial at Marvel, all the problems were gone. Kurt and him worked closely together, and they came up with a cohesive plot and directions for all the characters that the book finally was okayed. And boom, there you have it. JLA Avengers, which is the thing that George has been wanting to do since 1983. The first thing that they agreed upon was this image was going to be on a cover. He wanted Superman holding Thor's hammer with Cap's shield. And Kurt was like, I love it. Beautiful. We're doing it.
If anybody's worthy, right?
Yeah. So this is pretty much the culmination of his career. After this, he wound up doing Brave and the Bold with Mark Waid and J. Michael Straczynski. I really encourage people to pick up these first 12 issues of Brave and the Bold, because I think this has some of his best work of taking obscure characters and throwing them together.
He made it to Teen Titans, yes.
They had a cameo on Teen Titans Go, which he did his own voice for, which was great to see. I just have some random images of Perez art, just because I freaking love his art. Darkseid versus Thanos with the monitor in the background. I think that's a beautiful cover. This is beautiful, and I hope they put this out as a poster. When it became public knowledge that George's health was failing, DC commissioned this image, which was put in their books. You had a collaboration of tons of artists. You had Jim Lee here, all kinds of people. Tom McFarlane, I believe, is here.
Yeah, he's there. Yeah.
George himself and the Titans were drawn by Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Mhm.
And I think if it's anybody who's a contemporary of George, it would be Jose Lopez, definitely.
Absolutely.
And you should definitely seek out this image and the chart, which tells you who drew every one of these characters, because it's fascinating.
Well,
Alex Ross,
Alex Ross Spector. That's there.
Spector,
That's perfect.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
So Legion was a book that he always wanted to work on, but he didn't really get to do much except for the Legion of Three Worlds. This is surprised me that he designed this the armor for Lex Luthor, so he would get a cut of those action figures whenever they did an action figure of Lex Luthor in this armor. And also, I wanted to point out the Who's Who covers, which is definitely something that's what Perez would jump on. Also, the Who's Who in the DC universe. The history of the DC universe. And lastly, this surprised the hell out of me.
Of course, right?
I Googled George Perez Godzilla, and this is from 1979, where somebody commissioned George Perez doing Godzilla versus Ghost Rider.
Oh man!
And I tried to track down
Ghost Rider.
I tried to track down the owner of the sketch to try and buy it off him, but he didn't answer my emails. So
that'd be a hard one to let go.
Yeah, so there you have it.
Thank you, James, for the extensive history of George Perez. So let's talk a little bit about George, in particular. With the time that we have, again, we're going we're going over than expected, but I think it's worth it. What was great about George Perez? Again, he's my best friend, who's watching right now. That was his artist. That was his favorite artist. Now, my favorite artist, and most of you know this, if you watch my show plenty of times, you've heard me say my favorite artist will always be Art Adams. But George was my second. And it was because of that. It was because of the fact that he was a no-holds-barred artist, but more importantly, sentimental-wise, he's a Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx, man. So, how, you know what I'm saying, guys?
Yeah.
From St. Raymond's High School, man, and it's like he's one of our own, and he never stopped being that. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying he never stopped being, just a kid from the Bronx, but what I'm saying is that he was always humble. He was a humble soul. Every time you got to a show and you met him, he was a darling to talk to. And he would just say fun things. You know what I mean? It's like I have plenty of autographed books by George Perez. I remember one time he said something really nice to my wife. He was talking about something, and he said something really nice to her, and they ended up taking a picture, to the point that every time there was a show, my wife would show up and he'd say, "Hey, how you doing?" So that was something that was really special to me when it came to George in particular. He was famous for wearing these shirts that his wife made, from what I remember. Lamb chops, if you guys remember the lamb chop shirts that he would wear, because that was the thing. So he was famous for doing that kind of stuff. But in reality, it's like I can't say he ever had a bad issue. You know what I mean? There's people out there that you see their work and you say, that wasn't the greatest run. I can't say that with George. Just like you said, The Brave and the Bold, even though it wasn't highly praised as all the other books were, it was still amazing. The artwork was great. I love Mark Waid as a writer. Mark Waid, he is such a good writer. I'm loving his Superman Batman, and I'll praise that all day. If you guys are reading Superman Batman World's Finest, it's on issue 2, so it's easily accessible. Read it. It is awesome. Dan Mora is the artist. He's amazing. But it's just I just love George Perez's work in general. George Perez was the reason I really got into comics. My first comic book was that Marvel Tales story. My second comic book was the Wolverine cover with Mike Farley, where he's holding with Wolverine, and not the Wolverine cover. It's the Wolverine cover of Incredible Hulk. You know, the ones with the claws that does the reflection.
340.
340. Thank you.
I'm
But
a huge McFarlane fan, so
right,
I knew what you're saying.
So that was my second. But the comic book that really got me into comics, that I could say this is what I want to be doing forever, was this book. That's the reason I got a T-shirt. But there was something different about Infinity Gauntlet when it came out, right? Again, Adam Warlock's my favorite character, and no one drew Adam Warlock the way he drew him.
Oh yeah, no,
right.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong about Starling. I love Starling's Adam Warlock, but George Perez's Adam Warlock is amazing to look at. And the one thing that I wish I would have saw more of was George Perez on X-Men, because that's the one thing that he didn't really stick. He never really got a chance. The Infinity Gauntlet gave us a chance to see him do X-Men characters.
You know, I'm
really
glad you brought that up.
That. Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's funny, if you look at those issues, the John Byrne, Terry Austin issues, George Perez did the covers.
Mm-hmm.
And so it amazes me. I think back then, even though they were contemporaries, I think back then, at that time, Byrne got more of the accolades. It was Byrne that was the superstar artist because of his work with Chris Claremont in taking X-Men and making it a book that you could relate to. Whereas Perez was doing Avengers and Fantastic Four, and it was the same basic stories, but great art, yes, but it was just the same.
It was very
superhero
Silver
battles.
Ages, right? Very Silver Ages in the way.
Yes, it was a superhero book, whereas X-Men was a book about something, and that's why I think Byrne got more of the spotlight back then. Even though Perez was working and did more, he had more books than Byrne. I mean, Byrne eventually left and did his own thing with X-Men and all that, but Perez never left. He was always in the spotlight, and I think it took something like working with a Mark Waid or a Kurt Busiek to really show off and give him the exposure that he needed. Whereas instead of just being a superstar artist, he did great storylines. Well, and Wonder Woman.
But here's the thing. I think I agree with you with that, but I think this was his X-Men.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Teen Titans was his X-Men. So everything the X-Men was the Teen Titans. The difference here, of course, is that the Teen Titans are the sidekicks, right? But X-Men was relevant as it dealt with, discrimination and things like that, and that's what made it relevant. But really, what made X-Men relevant, I think, is that it was targeted really for a teenage audience. That's how I looked at it, right?
Yeah.
It was very.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
It was targeted towards a teenage audience, and the Teen Titans was exactly that. And what I loved about Teen Titans in particular, what he and Wolfman did with Teen Titans, yes, we had the sidekicks, because that's what Teen Titans was originally. They were about the sidekicks, but with the inclusion of Starfire, Raven, Cyborg, it became. One month it was a sci-fi book, the other month it was a supernatural book, and the other month it was a superhero book. And sometimes it was all of them, right?
Yep, it was all in one shot in one book. Yeah,
and no other book did that the way Teen Titans did it, and it gave George a chance to do artwork in all different fields. It didn't have to be a crime drama. It didn't have to be a sci-fi book, where all these other books were very much like that. When you think of X-Men, it was very urban based in a way. That's how I looked at it.
Especially the earlier issues with
but the John Byrne series, the Paul Smith series, and things like that. That they were very urban based, and then they started getting cosmic with Jim Lee and things like that.
It kind of get a little cosmic with
with the Shi'ar pirate,
in the Phoenix Saga.
but it always felt urban to me, where the Teen Titans were the opportunity to be like a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah.
Daryl, what are your thoughts on George Perez in particular?
Well, for me, it was George Perez that, like one of you guys said, he was the one that made me want to become a comic book artist. I started in '77, and I looked at Jack Kirby's artwork, and it was nice. A little weird to me, but it was nice. I saw like other artists there, and it was good, But when I saw Avengers 160, that's the point where I said, "Wow, I want to do what this guy is doing," and that guy was George Perez, and that's when I started like really studying how to do comics, how to draw people, how to draw backgrounds, how to tell a story like that, like him, and a lot of my style is a little bit like him, but nowhere near his skill level. But but it was with him. In fact, one of my first efforts at drawing a comic book is me right here when I was 14 years old, doing my own version of Avengers 160 right here.
Wow.
Yeah, this was my
And that's let's not forget about how well his artwork works with color.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It
goes hand in hand. It feels like it just goes hands in hand.
But I would not want to cover. I honestly would never want to color a George Perez book. It would just be too much work.
Yeah,
the pressure, just the pressure.
Well, James would know from doing coloring for a few things. It's like just to throw down the flats might be a pain in the butt.
Oh yeah. That's why those cross-gen covers really blew me away, because that was the first time you really saw very high detailed rendering, digital coloring with Perez.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot to mention, I was going to bring up the connection between that and Justice League Avengers. The guy who was the owner of CrossGen, I think his name was Mike Alisi. He wanted to hire George because George was on the outs with the big two. He was annoyed at them. And so he didn't like to be a freelance. He wanted to be a hired guy at a studio. And but then somebody was mentioning doing Justice League Avengers again. And Mike Alisi at CrossGen said, go to Marvel and DC and tell them, if you don't let me do Justice League Avengers now, I'm going to CrossGen. And so it's because of that really kicked it into high gear for JLA Avengers. He wound up working for CrossGen.
Talk about an ultimatum, right?
Yeah, that's how he got the contract for Justice League Avengers, was because he threatened to go work for CrossGen for 2 years, and then it would have been delayed another 2 years.
And the thing with Justice League Avengers in particular, that particular book, because again, all the time that it took to get to it, right?
Yeah.
And let's just face it, in that time, in the really 76 to 82, which is where Marvel and DC were playing nice with each other, they were always throwing out these crossover books, right? Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Hulk, and then they went and they continued, and then Teen Titans and the X-Men, which ended up being the last one, which would have been that George Perez moment because Teen Titans is his, right?
Yeah.
And Walter Simonson got it. And like you, I have my copy of it. I love looking at it. It is gorgeous to look at. But now, and I never thought of it then. It's like, I don't remember Simonson for being known for doing these two.
Right.
Simonson wasn't known for those. Simonson was known for Thor more than anything, right? That's Simonson. If you give me Thor, you get Simonson and stuff. So it was looking back at it now, it's like, that's weird, right? Because usually they will get the people that were associated with those characters to kind of like marry the two. And
yeah, he was supposed to do that. And he kept holding out for Justice League Avengers. He goes, I'm not doing that unless you give me both. Because he was basing his year's income based on those two books. And because they didn't approve the plot for Justice League Avengers, he's like, okay, fine, I'm not doing either one. Goodbye.
Yeah. But he did get to do he did get a run that, you know, Titans was one thing. We talked a little bit about Infinity Gauntlet, but let's talk about Crisis for a moment.
Oh yeah, Crisis changed a lot, changed the game a lot in so many ways. Yeah, man.
Okay, about a week ago, has it been a week ago now? Last week I talked about Identity Crisis. So I don't know if any of you got a chance to watch the Identity Crisis where we talked to Rags, and we were talking about the emotion, that it was a very emotional book, and it was very down to earth. Crisis on Infinite Earths is what we call the crossovers. That's how I look at it. I don't think there's any other book that could top Crisis of Infinite Earths the way this book topped it. And more importantly, these two in particular, the death of Supergirl and the death of Flash, or what we thought was going to be the death of Flash.
Yeah. After so many times, bring them back. Yeah.
Right.
But I think what makes it not only that those issues was that it was such a huge crossover, but you had those two major issues happening all in one storyline. Usually, you kill one character and you wait like 2 years and you bring them back and things like that. But when you had something big like that, not only Supergirl died, and you have the Flash as well dying, it was like, whoa! It was like so much stuff happening. It was probably just heavy for the reader.
Yeah, and looking at these two, and I like looking at these two books together. And the reason why I like looking at these two books together is that with the issue with Supergirl, right? Issue 7, you see all the characters in the background, right? So there's a lot of characters in the background, a lot of details. And in the very next issue, which is if you look at them together, they're very similar in what he was doing. But the difference is in issue 8 is Flash and Mira. I can't remember his name. What was the name of that villain? It's
Psycho Pirate.
Psycho Pirate. I was thinking about someone. Yeah, Psycho Pirate. Who knew about the multi Earths and continued afterwards. The way they're holding each other, and in issue 8, is that Flash ends up dying, not Psycho Pirate, as it appears in this issue. But again, there's no need to show multiple characters in that cover. You just see those two characters and the legs of who I believe is the Anti-Monitor.
You could say it's a detriment that they put that dialogue, that caption up there, the final fate of the Flash. If they had taken that off, it would have been more of a shock. If you bought that issue, looked at it, and didn't know that something was going to happen to the Flash.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah.
But Crisis is the book that did its best to clean up DC's continuity problem, right?
Yeah.
It did what it could do, but continuity today is like you throw it out the window.
They improved it to so much more, because then that's how you kind of get a better understanding of their multiverse. Anytime anyone speaks to me about the multiverse, I always feel that DC does it better.
I agree.
They do it so much better, and it's not like, I'm not gonna say a particular writer, but it seems like almost every writer that has gone to DC and does that type of writing does it so damn well. It's just amazing. And Crisis
it could be argued. It could be argued both ways. In numerous interviews, George would complain that because DC kept rebooting their books, that it was hard to tell what the characters are doing at any given time. And there are multiple times when George would leave books because characters were acting differently than he knew about. Yeah. And editorial would be like, no, it doesn't act that way. And George is like, since when?
Okay.
True. 52, right?
The new
yeah, New 52 really drove him nuts.
Oh God, yeah.
But it was the first time it was the first real time that the concept of anything, I think this was one of those times where it was the first time it was anything goes.
I enjoy that. Well, when DC does it, when DC does something like that, I enjoy it very much.
So
well done.
the last time I saw something that happened afterwards, you had the ultimatum story where anything goes, and it kind of fell flat because it kind of ruined certain things.
Oh,
but in Crisis, it was such an impact that today, you know, we're clamoring for it, and you know they're talking about Flashpoint, but Crisis is really the story.
No, yeah, it's
you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Crisis is the
DC
real
just
story.
needs to, yeah. You bringing that movie up, I just feel so bad. You know, I don't want to get off the tangent, but I just feel so bad for Michael Keaton because I know, you know, they're gonna destroy that character, and yeah, there's nothing I can say besides they're gonna destroy that character.
Is it actually happening though?
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. There's just problems with there's problems with
they're finishing up, right?
Well, there's problems with Ezra.
Oh, okay.
That's in a nutshell.
I can care less about him. I can care less about him.
But he has been in the spotlight for negative reasons, unfortunately, and you know, and it's obviously it's affecting what could potentially be their biggest movie to come. So I don't know what's gonna happen. There's talk about reshoots for it and things like that, but.
Can I
let's cancel it? Let's just cancel it. Let's get that petition going.
Can I ask?
Let's get the Batman Beyond movie. Let's get that. That would.
That I'd love to see.
Yes. The Batman Beyond movie, Keane, would be the best thing.
Let me ask the same question that I asked in the Neal Adams segment. Who do you think is the current artists that are the next George Perez's?
Well, I can give you the answer for that one. That was actually easy.
That one I could answer. Yeah,
that one's easier. I don't know if Daryl, who do you have in mind? Because I already know who it is.
I say Phil Jimenez.
There's the guy. That's
George. Yeah, I forgot about him.
I would agree with you, except he doesn't seem to be doing a lot of those big crossover books right now.
He's not doing it, but he is the George Perez.
I think you know who's even better than Phil?
Yeah.
You know who's even better than Phil and has that kind of way? Dan Mora.
But Dan Mora his art style's a little different. Dan Mora is the guy who's doing World's Finest. He's very distinct, but with Dan Mora's style, it's very loose brush strokes. If you ever watch his style, it's very brush stroke style. So I find it difficult to compare him to a Perez in that sense, because Perez is very strict with his weight. Right? When you see his line work, it's very heavy.
I just love his colors. His colors is almost Perez-like.
So no, and that's what and that's the difference with Mora. Mora has this very loose approach to his style.
What's his name again?
Dan Mora.
Dan Mora. I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah,
so I gotta check him out.
Watch World. Again, I couldn't praise it enough. World's Finest. The newest World's Finest.
Me personally, I like him at World's Finest, but I really like him in Once Future King.
Yes, Once Future King's good.
Future King. I think that's kind of where I see
Future State. He did some Future State stuff.
Yes, he did too. Yeah, he did too. But that's for me, Dan Mora's. That's where I get that George kind of Perez because of just the color and that being that's more of a mythology book that George seems to like to kind of gravitate sometimes. That's where I see I can see him do this. But Phil, but like you guys said, Phil Jimenez, I totally forget because he's still a hot artist, but he was so
Infinite Crisis. How could you not, right? Think of it like that, right? Infinite Crisis, and you know, Infinite Crisis is his homage to that book. So I will say it's Jimenez.
Jimenez definitely is influenced by Perez, but I think if you were to talk to him now, I think he's trying to evolve. I don't think he wants to be known as George Perez, a George Perez clone. I think he wants to expand his style. And he should, because you know, again, I look at other people, and again, going back to who I said, Art Adams, Nick Bradshaw. If you ever look at Nick Bradshaw's, it is carbon copy Art Adams. To the point
when he does a grin, when he does that grin,
it's carbon copy.
Mirror.
And even to the point that they're going to do New Fantastic Four with the Wolverine, Hulk, Spider-Man, and Ghost Rider. And instead of getting Art Adams, they got Nick Bradshaw. That's how much. That's how much everyone knows he's a clone of Art. And again, nothing against Nick Bradshaw. I think he's a fantastic artist. But when I see his work, I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
see Art Adams.
Yeah.
And you know, like Jimenez, when I see Jimenez, I see someone copying George Perez.
That's what I see.
What ends up happening with these guys is that they need. I'm happy to hear that if that's true, that Jimenez says he wants to evolve his style, so he wouldn't become a George Perez. I don't think he's a clone of George Perez. His style is very much influenced by George Perez to the point that he's being acknowledged as a George Perez clone. But if you're going to be a clone of anybody, why not be a clone of George Perez? You know what I'm saying?
I was just about to say that. You know, it should be a huge.
If you have to be a clone, right?
If you gotta be,
but
why not?
There's a lot of guys out there. Like
I'm gonna throw another name out there, and it's a friend of all of ours. I think Chris Batista could be another George Perez team guy.
That is true. Yeah.
You throw a team book at him.
Yeah.
And Chris Batista, who I love, and I've been trying to get him to the show, but he's been dealing with some personal things, that I won't share here. It's nothing bad in particular, but Chris Batista, every time he's a go-to guy. He's always been a go-to guy. He's never had that explosive book, right? But he's worked on materials because he's one, consistent, two, he's always there. You always count on Chris, right? And that's praises to a guy that, I consider him a friend because we're always talking on Facebook, right? I may not hang out with the guy, but we could talk about, and James, you know this, we could talk all day about industrial rock music, right? And stuff. And every time he mentions something, I'm like, I'll throw something out there. We'll say something. I'll say something like KMFDM, and he could respond with "sucks" because we know the joke. We know the joke. If you know KMFDM, you know why they suck. But that's giving praises to a band we love. So yeah, I could see Batista being definitely that guy. What I would love to see is Batista have a blowout book. I think sometimes you need that. I think George was able to get that. Not once, but multiple times, right? That it's just that when it comes to artists, they need runs that's going to make them to that next level, right? Neal Adams, Batman, Green Lantern, Arrow, right? Those books were just seminal, right? They were historic. George Perez, say what you want to say about Wonder Woman, but Wonder Woman is the like you said, Patty Jenkins, Wonder Woman looks like George Perez's comics
from head to toe.
When George,
which is great. Which is great. That's exactly me personally. That's exactly what I envision Wonder Woman, and I think everyone else does, because even going into the animated series, they gave her that kind of Eastern European kind of voice,
the Greek goddess, because
When George,
that's the way it should be played. Yeah.
When George was finishing up Crisis, he said in an interview that out of the big three, Wonder Woman, besides the original creator, was always a book that somebody was assigned to. Nobody actively went after that character because nobody wanted to do it. George actively went after it and said, I could do a better job because I care about the character. I want to bring in mythology. I want to bring in Ares. I want to bring in Zeus. I want to bring in Hera, all these characters that nobody's doing anything with because she has this rich history that no one is delving into.
Yeah, and even the creator is, recently they started talking a little bit about, the type of person he was. He was a, he was a feminist. He was all that stuff, and they made a movie about it as well. If you ever get a chance to see it, talking about what's his name is Marston, right?
Yeah, William Moulton Marston.
Yeah, so Marston, definitely check it out. Very controversial, dude. There was bondage issues and all that stuff.
I didn't get to see the full. I think it's on Amazon. I think I saw it on Netflix.
So
that biography about him. Yeah.
He was a very interesting individual, especially during his time.
Yeah.
But George himself was definitely a feminist. On today, as I was pulling to my driveway, they had an interview on NPR with Gail Simone, who was talking about George, saying that one of the things that he did was he gave the characters, the female characters, very different body types. He wasn't afraid to draw a character flat-chested, or to give like Raven different, almost Indian features, you know, because he knew women look different. He grew up around different women, so he's going to draw them differently. And I say, next to somebody like Jaime Hernandez with Love and Rockets, George was the only one that drawing different types of body types on women.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even this past weekend, I was at a show and I was asked to draw Peggy Carter, Captain Carter, right?
Yeah.
Because she's in, obviously, with what's going on right now, that she's very much in the limelight, her character. And I went to look at a picture of Captain Carter, and when I drew her like I would probably draw any woman, right? There's just features that you see, and it's very, I guess you could say, plain in that sense when drawing a character sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I know if George was asked to draw Captain Carter, he would do his absolute best to make her look British. And I don't know what the definition of making a woman look British. I can't tell you. If I could, I would have drawn it that way, right? I would draw that way. But he would know how to do it, and that's the point. He would know what a British woman would look like. He would know, again, being Puerto Rican himself, he would a Puerto Rican character, what she would look like. His America Chavez would look like a Puerto Rican character, just like his Scarlet Witch would look. She would look European, like a gypsy. He drew her like a gypsy.
Yeah.
So, and again, that's one of the highlights of who George Perez was as an artist, not just as just a person. Because again, he was overall a great guy. I don't hear any bad things about George Perez. Now, I will say, when he needed to stand up for himself, as you said with the JLA Avenger, he will stand up for himself, and that's the perfect type of person he was.
That was the Bronx coming out.
That was the Bronx in him, man. That was
the Bronx coming out.
He's definitely a Bronx. Okay, guys, let's wrap things up because we're about to go to 2 hours. We'll start with you, Fury. Tell me one thing you loved about George Perez.
Oh, man, George Perez. Sadly, well, what I loved about George Perez is his honesty and genuine to just everything that he does. You can see it in his artwork, especially when he did team books. So from the Justice League to Teen Titans, and Avengers. I felt as though those books kind of brought the best out of him. For some reason, I think he liked something very family oriented, and you could see it in his artwork. That's why each of those books brought a light to something. Like we were speaking earlier about him always bringing light to each character. There was no really dark shadows where it doesn't really need to be. It was everything kind of light, and you can see that in the way different stories that people would tell about meeting George Perez. He was always giving a handshake, giving a hug, saying such kind words, and even as before his timely death, he actually wanted to see people before he go. He was actually, it's kind of, you don't see that with, you're a legend of an artist. You don't have to do that. We go to different conventions, and we kind of see which way kind of different artists, behave, and they once they get a hot book and they become, they think they're almost godlike, and they handle different people differently. But George Perez was very, very down to earth, very humble, like you said, Izzy, and you can see that in everything that he did. Like I said, to me that was the biggest thing that stand out when his time is death. He wanted to do a whole con, he wanted to do a whole meetup, he wanted to see everybody and continue to give, the fans, which I truly believe he was very grateful for, memories, to continue sharing memories with them, and he felt. Like I said, he felt very like it was a family. Like we felt like he was part of our family as well.
Darryl, what you have to say?
For me, with George, the thing that strikes me the most among a lot of things, is with his work, there was enthusiasm. It looked like he was just having a blast. He was having a ball drawing these books with all these amazing characters, with like 20, 30 characters in it, with every
That's a small number for him.
every little brick in the building rendered and everything, and the spokes on the car and everything. And it never looked like he was in it for a paycheck.
Yes.
His work looked like if anything, he might would have done it for free. I don't know if he would have done it for free, but if if he could subsist without having to pay bills or anything like that, it looks like he would do all this stuff just to be doing it because he enjoyed it. And it really shows in his work, and it's something that I try to emulate, and just try to have fun with the medium. And I think that that's something that George really showed in his work, and I really appreciate it.
Exactly. He would do a cover of a book and include 1 billion characters. He would get paid the same amount he would get paid if he did like 2 characters. Right?
Yeah.
So I agree. It wasn't about the character. It wasn't about the money for him. It was about the love for the industry. You could clearly see, because anyone who's an artist knows, man, that's a lot of work. Your hands are tired. And I remember him telling me when we were in the last show, he was showing me one of his JLA Avengers pictures that he did. He said, it took me 3 weeks to do it. And he said, and I got paid the same amount if I took 3 days. So, and again, it wasn't the fact that he was like, they should have paid me 3 weeks worth. It was that he wanted to devote that time for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
James, what about you? One last thing you want to say about George?
I was going to show my Crisis omnibus. They put out it was in a silver slipcase, and it came with Alex Ross painted George Perez cover. But I guess I left it upstairs. But I can't say
it somewhere.
So I can't say.
I'll find it.
I think both what Fury and Daryl said are absolutely perfect. So my last thing is I had one last anecdote that surprised me in researching George. Remember when Stan Lee was doing a bunch of books called Stan Lee Creates the DC Universe? And it was his take on different characters.
Yeah. I remember that.
One of the books that was supposed to happen but didn't, it was Stan Lee's Crisis. And George was supposed to draw it.
You're killing me with that one.
But it fell through. It didn't happen. And George said in an interview that one time he was at a con and Stan walked by and said, "Hey, George, how come we never worked together?" And George had to remind him we were supposed to. It was supposed to be like Stanley's Crisis.
That would be Stan.
Yeah, so imagine that. A Stanley Crisis book with George Perez. Yeah, is that gorgeous?
That's the one, yeah. Wow.
And again, look at oh my goodness. First of all, it was a situation that they were doing it for the omnibus, right? And when you look at this image, this is George at his finest. And I must say, if I was Alex Ross was expecting something. But when he saw this, he said, "Oh," he definitely used a word that we will all say when seeing this, and holy shit, and go, where do I begin? That's the first thing I'm thinking, because if you look at this image, and if you look, it's very hard to look at it very deeply, but you got characters that you wouldn't even think of, like Uncle Sam is in this picture.
I think this is one of those covers that Daryl just said he just enjoyed to do. They said, do something for us. There's no limit. Go ahead and just go. And he said, no problem. I got something for you guys. And I think you could tell from that.
But this is the one that I think he said he took 3 weeks to do. I want to know how long it took Alex Ross to take.
Wow.
because
I-
again,
Wow.
you got the Superman image, right, which is the big one. You got Flash running, then you got all these ancillary characters behind them, all going in. They're going through some action, and then to top it off, you got the bottom where it's like a memoriam with all these characters.
On the bottom, yeah. And with
I-
with so much detail. So this is just a salute to both,
and
to
let's
just
just have
greatness on
fun and
both sides.
wait, and let's just have fun and let's put some TV screens in it too. Why not?
Yeah, it just wasn't enough.
I believe it was Justice League Avengers 3, whichever one is the wraparound cover with all the characters.
Yeah.
I believe he said that one sent him to the hospital because he developed carpal tunnel on his
He
hand.
developed
Wow.
carpal tunnel.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
how
that
much
was
he
the
worked.
one.
He would.
There's an image of him working on it on the floor because it was too big for his drawing table.
Oh my goodness. Well, guys, thank you for doing this.
No, thank you.
It's been great. Thank you guys for watching. Again, share this video with everybody. Hit the like, man. Let's get this video out to everybody because again, it's really our love for these two greats in the industry that we will miss seeing any new work from them, but they did leave a lot of work for us to just admire and love and to cherish.
Can
with
I
that
share
said,
one thing?
yeah, go for it, Daryl.
One last thing. Like last year during the pandemic, when I was doing remote teaching, I got a lot of free time. And so I had made this book of 100 of my favorite things.
Oh.
And for my favorite comic book artists,
Look at that.
side by side,
Nice.
my favorite.
Right next to each other, right?
Right
Right?
next
Yeah,
to
you
each
couldn't have
other.
it any better.
Who knew? Who knew?
Yeah.
But yeah, rest in peace, guys.
All right, guys. With that, we close off. Thank you for being a part of the Izzyverse. We'll see you next time, guys. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.